Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for today's meetup. On today's agenda, Chris and Scott will be providing an overview of addressing maps and apps. Just a reminder, we'll be recording and posting this meetup on meetups.com shortly after the presentation. During the meetup, if you'd like to make comments or chat to other participants, then feel free to use the chat window. However, if you'd like to submit a question for the team to answer, then please submit them through the Q&A pod. With that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, Heather. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Chris and I wanted to take some time to kind of review with you the addressing solutions we have in the ArcGIS for Local Government solution, and we realized earlier this year that it had been some time since we had gone through the solutions with the community, and a lot has changed since we last met with you. So today we're going to talk about the address maps and apps, and as many of you know, right, addresses are a fundamental information element that's managed at the local level, and it's used in a whole variety of key workflows like 911, permitting, your assessment and taxation workflows, water and sewer billing, and other types of activities, right? Well, some could say that parcels and addresses are kind of the two fundamental building blocks for most information managed at the local level. But we also are seeing a growing trend where our address information is also critical at the state level, and there are many states that are currently underway working on statewide address layers for things like NextGen 911, voter registration, any other human services as well. We're going to spend most of our time today, though, really focused on the needs of local governments and the specific responsibilities they have to manage authoritative inventories of addresses and then begin to share them and federate them with state governments and other agencies that are interested in aggregating this information. So if you look at the solutions we have for addressing in the local government solution, you'll find a couple fundamental kind of tools, and we're really focused in on kind of the fundamental management of address information at the local level. And today we're going to show you the address data management solution, which is a configuration of ArcMap and a real focused editing map that supports the maintenance of road centerlines, site addresses, mailing addresses, and even related postal addresses. And essentially what address data management is really designed for is to help folks manage new address information and existing address information in the community. We'll also then talk about how once you start to accumulate and organize your address repository for your community, there's a series of solutions that really help you extend and involve larger aspects of the community to begin to improve the overall quality of that information. It could be go out and do field verification and ultimately maybe even crowdsource missing address information or to collect or correct new address information as well too. So today we're going to show you all of the solutions that we've got. As I said, they're primarily focused on the authoritative management of that information, and we're also at the end going to hit on some of the work we've been doing to help you aggregate that information into larger geographies. So one of the challenges in the addressing space is that there's a lot of work that's been done on address standards. The Postal Service has done a lot of work, FGDC, NENA, and other addressing agencies that are responsible for address information have developed a lot of standards out there. What we've done in the addressing solutions is really take those standards, the NENA standards, the Postal Service standards, and use the FGDC as an additional content check and done a physical implementation of that in the local government information model, and ultimately provided you with a set of tools that you can use to manage this information in your community. What you'll find is that all the layers that we'll show you today are fully documented, and you can extend those layers also to meet very specific needs in your community. And many times we see that in communities that are trying to develop address repositories to support specific CAD and dispatch implementations in their community, and those systems typically have very specific data requirements for them. So let's dive right in. I want to start with a demonstration of the address data management solution and really focus in on how you can use this solution to manage that authoritative repository of address information. And then I'll turn it over to Chris, who'll show you some of the other solutions as well. So I'm going to start with the address data management map. This is a configuration of ArcMap and a series of add-ins that have been designed to help mapping technicians in your community really manage that authoritative information. Today you're going to see me interact with a couple key layers in the map. We've got site addresses, or address points, I'm sorry, address entrance points, site address information, roads, and facilities in the community. And you can see that this map's really been optimized for data management, and so there's a whole suite of feature templates that have been developed, and you'll see there's a set of add-ins that are delivered with this solution that actually optimize some of the workflows I'm going to show you today. And so some of the tools we've developed are specifically designed for address data management. And there's also a configuration of the attribute assistant, which we use in a whole variety of data management solutions to help really optimize those workflows. So let's go ahead and get started with a couple kind of typical workflows we see in a local government. And I'm going to start with kind of a new development or new commercial development in the community. And one of the first things I'm going to do is actually begin to interact with the facilities. And so you'll see facilities, you guys can think of these as really common places in your community or named locations that you manage, and essentially they complement your address information. So in this case, we're going to add a new commercial facility and to get this workflow started. And I'm going to use one of the construction tools to essentially use the parcel boundaries to draw this new commercial facility in my community. So once I create that new facility, I can come in here and real quickly populate some information about that development. And you'll see that the feature templates have been set up to really optimize that data management workflow. So with a few simple clicks, I've got that new facility. What I also want to do is create a point location so this data can be used in other applications like E911. And so I just go ahead and quickly click on the map, and you'll see that the facility site point is inheriting the name that I laid down in that polygon feature, and it's populating some other key characteristics for that. So real quick, simple way to kind of manage that inventory of facility sites, and you'll see how that comes into play in a few minutes with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off those facilities for now, and we're really going to focus in on this new development. Now, one of the fundamental things that the address data management solution does is help you develop an inventory of master street names. Think of this as your really kind of authoritative list of street names in your community. So because this is a new development and we've got some new roads that are going in, the first thing I'm going to do is start by adding a new road to this master street name inventory. And this may be done during the planning process or maybe when during your permitting process. And this is where you'll start to see a lot of those standards come to life. So in the case of prefixes, I'm going to go ahead and put in the road name that was assigned, select the suffix here. In this case, we're just going to say it's North Wolverine Alley. And as I go through and add the individual elements of the road name, it's actually creating a full road name for me. It allows me to assign an alternate road name or an alias for that. Maybe I have a specific MSAG name that I'm matching up with my MSAG. And then finally, in this case, because it's a proposed development, I'm going to mark street name pending in my community. And all along the way, it's keeping track of, who's doing the updates and when I did that update. So real simple way, I've got now that new road name in my master street name inventory. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually add the local streets that are part of this development. So I'm going to go up to my feature templates here, and I'm going to select a new construction tool we've provided to help you add roads in your community. Now before I do that, one of the challenges that many communities have, right, is maintaining the integrity of existing center lines as you're adding new center lines to it. And you always want to be mindful of the starting and ending address ranges. So in this case on North Mill Street, you can see I've got a range of 1004 to roughly 1060 on the even side of the street. So what this construction tool does is essentially allow you to place that new local street. I'm going to go ahead and select where the curb cut might be, and in this case it's a simple cul-de-sac, so I'll just go ahead and finish that construction. And what you'll see happened here as I go ahead and come back to Mill Street is that when I placed that new curb cut, it actually maintained the parity and prorated the address ranges for me on the original North Mill Street. The other thing it could do, and you guys can decide what the right way to do, is that it could assign some new IDs on those segments or maintain the existing IDs depending on the workflows you have in your community. So what I did real quickly there is I went in and I just placed that new street and it prorated the address ranges for me. Now the next thing I'll need to do, right, is add those new address ranges on this road. So in this case, it's a real simple development. And we're just going to say that is, and here I'm going to come in and put in the first few letters of that road name. And you'll see this is where that master street name table starts to come into play. I just typed in a few characters of that road name, and it's looking at my master street name table and giving me any potential values that are in that street name. In this case, I've only got a single value, so I go ahead and populate that, and you can see that North Wolverine Alley now for my master street name table is now indicated on that segment. It also populated for me some other default values like state and municipality, and I could have it populate some of my MSAG and ESN information that's important to me and for my 911 community. Okay, so I've got that new road name in, very simple, straightforward. The next thing I'll probably want to do is to facilitate public safety needs and maybe permitting needs, I'm going to go ahead and assign some temporary addresses. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and use another construction tool that comes with the solution and essentially place a couple pending addresses along for these first two buildings in the community. So I'm going to select the location of the curb cut, and what you can see, one of the enhancements we made this year is that as I'm hovering over the road and beginning to kind of start to think about where I'm going to place that curb cut, it's giving me and telling me exactly how far along that road segment I am and ultimately what a proposed address both on the even and odd side might be. So I can use this real quickly if I have maybe some grid addressing schemes I use in my community to quickly kind of approximate where I'm going to do that. In this case, let's go ahead and drop it, let's say right there. I'm going to place one new address on the north and one new address on the south. And what's happened here real quickly, right, as I've placed these addresses, you can see that it's used the parity along that road to place a proposed address. In this case, I've got 160 North Wolverine Alley, and it's a real quick, simple way for me to then use that to place those locations. Now, I may want to keep going. Before I finish, let's come down and finish this and take a look at another use case, right? So many times you may want to place multiple address units within a single location. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select and then hit the A key or hotkey, and I want to auto-increment this location. Let's auto-increment it, let's say by, in this case, let's do 4, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that, dismiss it, and place 3 new addresses along that side. And you can see now that I've got those addresses starting in that first location, and then they're incrementing by 4. In this case, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they're in the on the even side, but that is what's happening there. So that's a quick way to kind of assign multiple units to that. So that is that. So now let's come back and kind of finish that out, right? So now I have multiple. I can either assign a single address in that case. Let's go ahead and look at the address attributes there. You can see that in this case, I've got that address was placed at 160, and it's used the full road name from my street centerline file. It's constructed for me a full address location. So I now have a full address point, full address name, I should say. And ultimately, it's used that facility site to populate a common place name on that address as well. The other thing it's done for me is computed a USNG grid coordinate value using the 1K grid, and finally inherited some information as well from that to kind of describe the type of development that's in that area. It's a real simple way to kind of populate those as well. The next thing I may want to do, right, is associate the mailing address with that site address. So in this case here, I can quickly come in and I can say add new, and now I've got a mailing address that's associated with it. So I can go ahead and put in owner information in this case and populate the mailing information. Now in this case, I won't go through the whole thing. You can see this is also where we've incorporated some of the Postal Service standards for things like state name and also for some of the other characteristics you typically see on a postal address, not necessarily on a site address. You'll also see I have the ability here to identify a couple different mailing address types. In some cases, it could be owner-occupant, like in this case, Or I could come up and add another address and maybe store not just owner information, or occupant information, I'm sorry, but also store maybe, maybe if you have an out-of-state land owner, you could populate that as well too, and then specify that as owner. So it allows you essentially to manage multiple mailing addresses for a single site address location. Really simple, straightforward way to do that. Now, the other thing you may want to do, just before I wrap that up, and maybe we'll take some questions, Heather, but the other thing I can do also is begin to kind of assign some additional metadata to these site address points. And many times, we may want to identify entrance points to give me tips on what's the most efficient way to get to that site address. Think of this in cases like large condominium developments where the address is maybe signed off Main Street, but the fastest entrance could be off First Street. Or vanity addresses where you've got, addresses assigned off of, in a major urban area, off of two different roads. But in this case, what I'm going to do is actually just quickly assign a driveway location to this 160 North Wolverine Way. So what have we really got here? Let's go ahead and tap on this and kind of show you and summarize what happened here. Well, the first thing we've got, right, is the original site address that was assigned. Then if I begin to expand this, you'll see that I have the two mailing addresses as well that I associated with that site address. I've got the entrance point that we just placed a second ago. And finally, I've got, the actual original address point that I used to locate those site addresses along North Wolverine Alley. So historically, a lot of people used a tool called the spider tool to essentially select that address point and then see all the features that are associated with it. You can still do that, but really it's not necessarily graphics drawn on the map. You can see that all of this information is kind of managed within the layers themselves. And so at any point in time, I can find, for that address, where is the driveway location or where is the entrance point and any mailing addresses that are associated with it. So that's a simple way for you to see kind of how those simple site addresses can be assigned. Now, let's go kind of continue through the development process, right? Lo and behold, that kind of final plat comes through, and ultimately they're not going to name that Wolverine Alley, but in fact they've changed the name. And with one simple update in your master street name table, you can go through now and begin to integrate that information into the features themselves. So I can go ahead and say, yep, let's go ahead and update the centerline feature I placed. Let's also go ahead and update all of the site address locations. I go through and just do a quick map refresh here, and you can see that what was once North Wolverine Alley is now North Spartan Alley. I click on that original address, the site address we placed in the beginning, and you can see that that's been updated for me. So it's a really simple way to leverage the master street name table as a way to maintain the integrity of those centerline features and the site addresses that are associated too. So the last thing maybe before I break and take questions, that was a real simple commercial development, but there also, in many cases are more complex addressing situations like trailer parks or maybe vertical addresses that you guys are managing. And I just wanted to show you how that's supported as well too. So let's come back here and select the current address point, and let's use this construction tool I mentioned, and we're going to go ahead and place that the driveway entrance for this development here, and just place a couple different addresses on these facilities. Now, when I come back here, you'll see that I have 3 different site address locations. What I can also do now is begin to add unit type and alternate unit information. So in this case, if it was a trailer park, I could enter in lot designation and the number, and you'll see that as I'm doing that, it's actually populating and updating the full address for me. So that's a real simple example of how you could do a lot. But maybe I have more complicated, and so maybe this isn't a condominium or a trailer park. It's actually a commercial development that has multiple floors, or multiple buildings. So I could say that that is building number 1, and it's go ahead and say we're going to unit number unit number 6, perhaps, right? And so all along the way, I can add these primary and alternate unit designations and unit numbers and use that to more tightly refine the actual address, site address as well. And so we have all of those different kind of combinations that are set forth in many of the standards, kind of physically implemented. You'll probably notice that as I was going through these unit types, these are actually unit types that are coming directly from the Postal Service that they recognize as well too. So that's just a simple way to kind of identify and kind of further clarify those vertical addresses or more complicated situations where you have multiple site address locations and so on and so forth. So let's take some questions, Heather.
Sure. Catherine has a question. What's the difference between site address and address points?
So it's a good question. So the site addresses, think of them as the physical location of that address. It could be, you guys could use parcel centroids to identify those. You could use building entrances. There's a whole variety of ways you could represent them, but that is essentially the service delivery address. The address points are really just metadata features that kind of further describe where along the road that address, kind of could be the driveway entrance, is placed. And so that's kind of how they play together. Quite honestly, most people will just use the site addresses in their locators and integrate that information in with other data systems they have, information systems they have. And the address points are really there just as further metadata to describe how that address was assigned.
Great. Charles's question is, does Attribute Assistant allow for pre-populating of fields?
Yeah, so the question is, yeah, and actually a lot of that's happening for me. Let me give you a good example. The place name is a really good example of that, Charles. So the Attribute Assistant is actually what is firing and calculating the place name when I drop a new site address. Was looking at, is there a facility site polygon in that location, and if so, what's the name, and then ultimately populate that for me as a place name on each of these site addresses. Yep.
Patrick's question is, how do we manage roads that have more than one alias name? For example, Main Street is also known as US 20 and State Road.
That's a really good question. So let me go ahead and identify Spartan Alley as a good example here. And what you'll see is that there's a couple ways you can track aliases. On the road names, you can assign, on the master street names I should say, you can assign aliases for each road name. What you'll also see that on each of the features, there are a whole series of designators, route designators as well. So in this case, it's a local street, so it has a county route. But if I went to a major arterial, and I'm not sure this is one, right, you'll see state route and state route types there as well too. And we actually have multiple, so you have a primary and secondary or alternate route as well. So in theory, you could have the local road name, an alias for that road name, a county route designation, an alternate county route designation, a state primary, state secondary, federal primary, and federal secondary designations on any one of your road center lines. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. And if that's not enough, then you can further extend that for your community as well.
Great. Dan's question is, what level of ArcGIS is needed for this? Is it basic, standard, or advanced?
You need standard because it's managing data that has geodatabase relationships. So that's kind of the standard, no pun intended, but that's the minimum versioning you'll need to run this.
Okay. Another question, Chital, I may have mispronounced your name, sorry. He was wondering how to do auto increment while numbering
that's a good question.
buildings.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually screwed up when I did the original demo, and one of you called me on it because I had two even addresses, and that's because I had my auto incrementing on when I placed that first one. So let's go back through it again and just show you. So what I can do is let's select a pending site address, and I use this construction tool and place the address point. When I'm placing the address point, I can hit the hotkey A, and that gives me my auto increment value. In this case, I'm not going to auto increment it at all. So then when I go place that site address, maybe place 2 site addresses here, finish the construction, they won't be incremented, and the numbers are there, correct? So yeah, it's really the hotkey allows you to get at that auto increment number and then place those addresses before you do it. And you can go anywhere from 1 to whatever the number is, and depending on kind of the first number, then that increments from there.
I think that is all the questions. There's a little bit of a discussion in the chat window, just about numbering units. Is it easy to add apartments that are 100 to 200 units?
Yeah, well, the way this implementation is designed, the solution design, is that every one of those address points is a unique feature in the geodatabase. So you could just copy and paste them and then auto increment the number. There's probably a couple different ways you could do that. But ultimately, each unique address is a unique feature, and then those features can be fed to locators, so you have a one-to-one relationship there.
Jane mentioned that it looks like you...
Oops, say that again, Heather.
Looks like her phone dropped, Scott.
Yeah.
So I can see the question. She asked about you set the auto increment to 4 and then 0 again, but both showed 5. It looked like when you were doing it, you changed the number and then you hit the X to close it out, so it didn't actually commit it. I think you have to enter to commit the auto increment value.
Yeah, so I didn't do it right. You're right, Chris. Yep. Yeah, so if I were to go in and place that again, like you're saying, and then hit A, right, and my commit, and then go 0, enter, then place the locations, right? And these are going to be backwards, obviously, you guys, but there we go. Yep.
Right.
Yes.
So what is that? It's 203 and 203.
Okay. So Chris, why don't I turn it over to you now and let you take us from here on some of the other addressing solutions. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. All right. You see an ArcMap there now, Scott?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. So I want to take some time to talk about some of our solutions surrounding the continuous improvement and maintenance of your address information. The first solution that I want to show here is our Data Reviewer for Addresses solution. And this is leveraging the Data Reviewer extension for ArcGIS Desktop. And as part of the solution, we provide a pre-configured Data Reviewer batch job that contains a series of checks that you can use to validate, maintain, and improve the integrity of your address data. So these checks test for errors in the attributes and the geometry of your address data, those site address points, the street center lines. These checks can find things like street center lines that have invalid address ranges. For example, they contain a null or a 0 in the range, or for example, where the from address is smaller than the to address, or even if the odd and even values are on the wrong side of the road. You can also find errors in your site address points. For example, site address points that are associated with a road that they're not within a given distance of. Maybe that could indicate a potential data entry error or something along those lines. So there's a lot of checks that come with it out of the box, but you can also further configure Data Reviewer and that batch job to add additional checks that meet your organization's needs. For example, at the user conference, I had a question about checking the road prefix direction, north, south, east, and west, and checking that against the direction of the road. And we came up with a workflow where we were able to do that type of check. So there's a lot of functionality there that's available with Data Reviewer, so I'd really encourage you to check it out. So let me go ahead and run a check. I think it's a good part of your workflow. For example, we all saw the trouble Scott has had with entering addresses, so I want to go ahead and check his work or check other work that he's made. So I'm going to run the batch check. Yeah. I'm going to run the batch check against those addresses. So first thing you're going to do in Data Reviewer is start the reviewer session. So I'm going to start a session, and this is just saying where in a particular geodatabase I want to store this information and what session I want to associate it with. After starting the session, we're going to go ahead and load the batch job. All right. So there's a couple different things you can do here. You can run it against a selection set. So if you've selected some site address points and street center lines, you could just run it against that. I could run it against the current extent of my map. That's the option I'm going to use. I can use a definition query, or I can run it against my full data set. I'm going to browse to the batch job. And this is what we provide with the solution. And this batch job defines those checks that we want to run against our address information. So after this loads. So here's all the checks that are available. There's quite a few options available. These are all documented on our solutions website if you want to learn a little bit more about the particular checks, but I'm just going to go ahead and run it for the current extent. So it's validating all those features and checking them against all of those checks, and it's going to produce a table with any errors that occurred as a result of the check. So I can go ahead and open the reviewer table. The reviewer table is going to show me those errors. Let me go ahead and expand this column a little bit to get a little more information about the particular check that failed and a little more description about what the issue was. Another thing I like to do is to symbolize the errors so I can get a visual in my map of where the errors are at. So we can see the items in red are the things that were flagged. So the first error here says that the road centerline full road name must match site address point full road name. So this is one where it's doing a proximity check comparing the site addresses point's road name to road center lines that are near it. And there's some threshold that if the point address isn't within a certain distance of that center line, then potentially it's an error in the assignment of that site address's road name. So if I take a look at this, I can hover over it and see that this is 1325 Southwest Street. And when I look at the road, I can actually see the road is actually Northwest Street. So it's a very subtle error, something that could easily be missed, but the check was able to find that this should actually probably be Northwest Street. So what I can do is start editing. Then I can select that point and I can go ahead and make that change to the road name associated with it. So if I open the attributes and change this full road name to Northwest Street, the full address will update to make that change, and now it's Northwest Street. I can come in here for this particular error and enter a correction status. I can say that I've resolved it per the guidance, and I can add a little note here, updated site address, point, road name. The other thing I can do is automatically verify the result. This is, as part of the data reviewer workflow, you may want to have someone else check the reviewer. So if I make a fix and I enter the correction status, I could not verify this result and pass it on to the next check, and they could verify my fixes. Since I'm the last line, the last person in the line, I'm just going to verify that result. Okay, the next one is I have two errors. It's saying that the road center line's left value is greater than the from left value is greater than the to left value, and the from right is greater than the to right. So let's select that road and go to the attributes. And you can see here that there was an error. I have from right of 440 and a to right of 436. So let me just switch those around. 40, and from left should be 437 to 441. I'm going to select both of these and enter a correction status again. I've resolved them, and I flipped the road.
And the drops in the wall, and that's
and then automatically verify. So now that I've fixed those errors, I can go ahead and run my batch job again, just to validate that everything's okay.
But I mean, he's the one that put the hub in, so he would know.
And hit run.
I mean, I would ask him why he put it in.
Now it's going to check everything again, and if
Chris,
Yep.
can everybody just mute their phones by pressing *6 because I hear some background noise while Chris is presenting? Please? Thank you. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yep, no problem. So we can see it came back, no records were returned, which means everything was successful. The fixes that I made validated all the checks. So this is kind of the iterative process that you can use Data Reviewer to do, validating edits that you make to your address information when you're adding new things or you're making modifications. You can have this pre-configured batch job with these checks set up that you want to run against it, validate that you didn't introduce any errors or any new errors weren't created, and then continue moving on. So that's how you can leverage Data Reviewer to really manage those address information and improve the quality or maintain the quality of the information in your authoritative address layers. So now I'll go ahead and close out ArcMap and move on to our next solution. So the next solution that I want to show is address crowdsourcing, which is a configuration of ArcGIS Online and the GeoForm configurable application template. So address crowdsourcing can be used by addressing authorities to enlist members of the general public or other interested parties in the continuous improvement of address information across the community. So with this application, citizens or other interested parties in the organization can contribute missing site address information by filling out a simple form from their desktop, tablet, or smartphone. So in this example, I want to submit a new address that I'm not seeing in the authoritative addressing layer. I know of the address. Potentially, I am the citizen who lives there, and I want to submit this new address into the authoritative layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is fill out this form. So I live at 116 North Wright Street. It's a building. This is in Naperville. Enter in some of my contact information if they need to get back in contact with me. Next thing I'm going to do is use the World Geocoder to search for that location. As I'm taken in here, you can see we have a building here that doesn't have a site address, so I can click on that map to set the location and submit that new address. So what's happened here is we've added, behind the scenes, we have two feature services. We have our authoritative site address layer, which is this those green points there that I've published as a service. And then we have a proposed site address layer, which is where I created that new feature in that contains that information about the proposed site address location as well as the location of that address. So I could take this and bring that layer into my address data management map and evaluate those addresses to validate that they're actual addresses. Or another workflow that I would want to highlight here is using Collector for ArcGIS to go out in the field and verify those addresses while on site. So if I come to Collector, I'm going to open the address field verification map, which is another solution that we make available that is used by field staff to validate those proposed site address points. So when I open the Collector map, I can see this proposed site address that I just entered through the address crowdsourcing app. I can zoom in and I can click on that particular site and get more information about it. So if I was on site here, I could inspect the building, and let's say, for example, I show up and I determine that this is actually, it's an apartment with 3 different units. So I want to go ahead and address that right now while I'm in the field. So I'm going to edit this first one, and I'm going to change its building type to apartment, and the number is 101. And I'm going to verify that this is a valid address on site. So I'm going to submit that change. Next thing I want to do is, because there are 2 other units in that apartment, I can copy the existing one. There's a couple options here that I have. I could just take all the attributes from that one and then place the point on the map. If I was in the field on my phone, I could be right next to the unit, and I could say, I could copy it and use my current location if I was there in Naperville. But I'm going to just use this like this one. I'm going to click on the map where it should be, and I'm going to update the unit number to 102. And then I'm just going to do this one more time real quick for the third one. Copy it like this one, click on the map, and this will be 103. So the other thing that I can do, so that was showing how I validated proposed site addresses. The other thing I can do is I can create new proposed site addresses. I have these editing templates available, so while I'm in the field, I can collect new information. If I'm at a new proposed development, maybe I want to collect that information on site, I can go there and start capturing this information using address field verification. The last workflow that I want to talk about is incorporating these proposed site addresses that have been verified back into our authoritative address layer. And there's a couple ways you could do that. You could use the address data management map that Scott showed earlier, and using the append tool, you could append features from that proposed site address feature service into your authoritative site address layer. So you could certainly do that. But I want to go ahead and show ArcGIS Pro as a potential workflow because it has a lot of tools that make working with web maps and feature services a lot easier. So I'm logged into my organization. I'm going to go into my portal. I'm going to open my addresses folder, and I'm going to open my address crowdsourcing web map in Pro. So this is the web map that's used by the address crowdsourcing application. So it has those 2 layers. It has the proposed site address layer, and it has the authoritative site address layer. And again, in ArcGIS Pro, I could use the append tool to write those features from one layer to another. But I'm going to go ahead and use the copy and paste in using editing to show a quick way that you can move features from one service to another. So here on the proposed site address layer, the first thing I want to do is remove the scale visibility range so I can see where those proposed site addresses are. Let me scroll into this. Pan this down a little bit. Okay, so what I can do is select those features. Yeah, things are a little bit slower when I'm presenting. Well, I'll just talk through the workflow. What I can do is I can select those features, and using the edit, copy, and paste special, I can paste into another layer, in this case, the site address point layer. I can paste those features into that layer, and they immediately become available in that feature service. So now if I go back to the address crowdsourcing application and I zoom to that location, I'm going to see those features as part of my authoritative address layer. So it's a way that I can delineate that those proposed site addresses have now been incorporated into the authoritative address layer. I can then update the attributes of the proposed site addresses to mark them as incorporated. They would be hidden from the field verification map, so I would no longer see those proposed ones, but I could always query for them later if I wanted to see any of the proposed site addresses that have been entered into the system. Looks like things came back. Let's see if I can do this real quick. Copy that. I want to paste special. I want to paste it into the site address point as a current address. So this is loading those features into that feature service. Now if I turn off the proposed site addresses and clear the selection, you can see they're now in the authoritative address layer. If I refresh my address crowdsourcing application and go back to that address, north, right. Oh, that was the one more thing I needed to do with these proposed addresses. I want to mark them as incorporated. So they're filtered out from the service. Let's see if I just zoom out if it will refresh. Yeah. So now the proposed addresses are gone, and I have the authoritative addresses there, going full circle from submitting new address sites, validating them in the field, and then incorporating them back into my authoritative address layer. And I could run data viewer checks as well to validate that there weren't any issues with those. But this is kind of the cycle that you'll go through as you're incorporating new site address information into your addressing layers. So I'll open it up for questions now if we want to do that.
Sure. I think this would be a question more for Scott, but Brett asked, can you add new site address points to an existing address point?
Can you add new site address points? I'd have to think, you could just select, we'd have to think about how that might work. So in other words, you wanted to use an existing address point and then add, I'd have to try that and see how that works, Heather. I mean, you could ultimately add the addresses manually, but the way the construction tool works now, it places that address point automatically. But you could definitely add them and then associate them in the geodatabase without any problem for sure. Yep.
Okay. Tim had a question within the chat window about using collector. How many current address points can you upload to ArcGIS Online? They have over 50,000 currently, and we would like to do that, do the field verification as well.
Yeah, I
You
would
wanna
say
take that,
in that
Chris?
regard, yeah, sure. I wouldn't be concerned with the amount of features that were in there, but I would do some things in your web map like setting visible scale ranges so things don't draw at all scales, because that's where you might run into problems if you're trying to draw all 50,000 at once. But if you zoom in close to a particular area and you're not rendering as many of those points, then it should perform fine. So that would be my recommendation. And actually what we do in our solution is we do put those visible scale ranges on the layers so they don't draw at all scales. You don't run into those problems of performance.
Okay. Nancy asked, excuse me, about multiple addresses at one place. Can you stack the points?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's all the questions for right now. Is there anything else that you want to go over? Oh, actually, Catherine has a question. Are there checks that can be performed for those of us who do not have data reviewer extension? As far as I know, I don't think so.
We don't
but
have, yeah, no, we don't have any checks per se that run just in ArcMap directly, but one thing I will say is that you know, if you use the address data management map, the attribute assistant and the construction tools inherently have a series of checks in there to improve the quality of your data as you're adding it. So certainly from a kind of this point forward thing, you can definitely leverage those construction tools and that editing map to kind of improve the integrity of your data and ensure that you're not, well, as long as you use it right. Unfortunately, I didn't today. You can ensure that you're putting odds and evens on the right side of the street and that everything is kind of, you know, the address ranges are integrated with, on your roads, also are used then to constrain the site address point locations. So there are definitely some, wouldn't call them checks per se, right? But there's certainly some integrity, data integrity built into those data management workflows.
Okay. One more question. Damon asked if you already have an address layer, is it possible to import that into this and have connectivity to the street? I'm guessing point or site address layer.
Yeah, so no, yes, that's a really good point. So even though so you can definitely import your existing address data and start using these construction tools. But there is no inherent relationship between the site addresses and the road center lines, right? The address points are just spatially coincident, and they use that spatial coincidence to grab the road name that you have assigned to that segment and assign it to the site address. But you can also use the master street name table to clean up or, you know, integrate at an attribute level the names you may have on your road center lines and the road names you have on your site addresses too. So there's a variety of ways you can kind of load your data into the system and then begin to clean it up and then use the construction tools going forward for all new addresses in your community, or maybe you're cleaning up addresses in certain aspects of your community.
Okay. Dan had a question. This is modeled from the local government information model, right? Well, it's in the information model itself.
Yeah. So the layers that you interact with in the editing map are stored in the local government information model. The layers that Chris showed you for address field verification are not. They're just feature layers that we provide with the solutions themselves.
Okay. That's it if you want to continue.
Okay. Yeah, so let me just wrap up, and then we can take a few questions. So Chris and I showed you several solution offerings we have in ArcGIS for local government to manage that authoritative address information in your community. But as I mentioned, there are a great deal of state agencies and regional agencies that are now working to aggregate that authoritative information for a whole variety of business needs. And I wanted to highlight one of the solutions we have that helps with that, and it's called community addresses. And community addresses essentially allows you to work with your peers to take that authoritative address information and aggregate it up maybe at the state level, which is typically what we see, or even at a regional level for things like dispatch and 911 purposes. And what essentially how community addresses works, right, is that as local governments, right, along the left-hand side of this diagram, right, you have your authoritative address information. And we provide a set of tools that allow you to feed that information either directly as a contributor or on a regular basis maybe, and then allow the state to aggregate that information. But ultimately, we provide a set of tools that allow, let's just say in this case, the state to align your fields with the statewide data layer, and then ETL that information into a single community address layer. And then ultimately, once you have that single community address layer assembled, you can then produce a whole series of focused maps, maybe do field verification like Chris showed you earlier, or maybe you can ultimately publish a locator that can be used for more widespread needs. And this community address solution leverages, right, the content that you're managing in the address data management solution, and ultimately allows you then to share that information or contribute it to this larger community address layer. The community address solution actually provides an ArcGIS Pro add-in that really simplifies the whole process of doing that extract, transform, and load. And what it allows you to do is do that field mapping between your source information that you manage locally and the target community address layer once, and then run that and contribute whenever you'd like. Or maybe the state has a whole series of configurations they've set up, and they know that when Waukesha County provides addresses this month, they know exactly what their format and how that format compares to the state of Wisconsin's address format, for example. And so the interesting thing about Data Assistant is it not only works with layers in a geodatabase, but it also works with services. So you could publish your addresses as a service, make it available in maybe your open data site. The state could then use Data Assistant, input that layer, and ultimately create a statewide data set. And there's a whole variety of other implementation, kind of tools that help with that transformation process. The other thing to point out is that this tool could effectively be used at a county level too, in places where the cities are the address custodians and they share that maybe with the county. So the definition of a community doesn't necessarily matter. It could be a county agency that's aggregating information from cities, maybe a regional agency that's aggregating it from a series of counties, or even the state as well. But these tools help you do that extract, transformation, and then run that not as an event, but as a reoccurring process so that community address layer is continually updated. So today we showed you essentially all of our addressing solutions. And the reason why we thought it was appropriate to schedule another meetup, it had been several years since we showed these addressing solutions, is because we did release a whole new host of enhancements with the June 2016 ArcGIS for Local Government release. We showed you many of those today. We had some enhancements to the construction tools based on some feedback that we had gotten over the years. Chris worked a great deal to get a new, simpler deployment of address crowdsourcing ready, and we showed you some of the work in address field verification as well too. The other thing we didn't have time to show you today, but also was kind of inherently related, is we released a new data management workflow for admin boundaries that you can use to manage, municipal districts, school districts, voting precincts, and other kind of administrative geographies that you manage at your local level. And obviously those polygon layers then have direct impacts on some of the characteristics you may populate on your addresses as well too. So there's a whole host of, if you've been a long-time user of our addressing solutions, right, there's some new offerings there that really help you extend your reach and improve the quality of your data. And there are also some enhancements to the fundamental data management solutions that we showed you today. So we've also been thinking about some new offerings as well too, and we're continuing to think about how we might be able to take some of those data management workflows that we showed you in ArcMap and maybe make them available through a web-based editing solution. And as ArcGIS Online and some of the editing capabilities begin to grow there, we'll continue to look at that. We have also been talking with our state solution team about some new data aggregation patterns for road centerlines and critical facilities as well too, which are two other data layers that are important to state agencies and other communities. And finally, we're keeping an eye on all of the new standards that are being released by NENA and some enhancements that, by FGDC when they do make them, and ultimately we'll incorporate those into the solution when they make sense. And so we're constantly kind of evolving these solution offerings, and your feedback's important because we use that to drive future releases. So that's it, Heather. That's all Chris and I had today for the addressing meetup, and certainly we can take any last-minute questions that have come up.
Not that I can see right now. If you have any questions, just please submit them. But yeah, no, there's nothing else.
Hey, Heather, I would say
sure.
One more thing. Tim specifically asked about 50,000 address points, so I was just interested in how many I had in my example, and that example that I was working on in Collector has 49,800. So
pretty close.
And it works fine. So I wouldn't be concerned with going up another 200 points.
Oh, Vince had a quick question. Where can we find information about the admin boundary data management?
On the solution site. Yep, so it's under, you'll find it under any one of a number of domains, either planning, economic development, public safety, but you can also just go right to the documentation page, and there's a direct link there as well. So I could just show you probably.
Sure.
So if I go to the solution site, real quickly here.
Oh, Chris Biscaglia put the link in the
chat
window too. Yep.
Good idea, Chris. Thanks. Yep. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so you'll see I just went to the documentation page and jumped on there as well.
Okay, great. Anything else that you guys wanted to add before I wrapped up?
No, I don't think. Chris, you got anything?
No.
Okay, perfect. Well, just to let you know, this is our last meetup of the year, so thanks everybody for joining us throughout the year. We'll be scheduling new meetups and posting them within the new year, so definitely look out for that. And also wanted to note that we're actually going to be changing our web conferencing software. So instead of using Adobe Connect that we currently use, we're actually going to switch to Zoom. So I'll be sending out an email about that probably within the next month just to notify everybody. So if you're a Zoom user, then that's good. If not, then I'll send you some information as well. So with that said, thanks for attending today's meetup. We look forward to seeing and hearing from you in the new year. And until then, have a great afternoon and happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, have a great holiday, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.